one of the things I wanted to get at was the prescription. We've got the diagnosis, and you mentioned three major reforms. You talk about a shift in the safety net, uh, reestablish an income gap, and then the flexibility of the safety net, and so on and so forth. And what could you elaborate on the reforms in the few minutes that we've got left?
Yeah, sure. So, as you said, we've talked about a bunch of areas of reform in terms of regulation, in terms of how we think about trade. I think there's a lot to talk about in terms of education
And you have one big one. I set you up for your big one, so I want you to
yes,
talk about the big.
and organized. Well, I always want people to realize that it's a lot of things that you don't intuitively think are, oh, that's connected to these problems that we're
Yeah.
having. College for all, it's a big part of the problem we're having. Cheering on the demise of unions, it's a big part of the problem that we're having. But as you said, in kind of public policy terms and what we think of as the federal government, the big things we fight about in Washington, one of the huge ones is how our safety net operates. And from a consumer focused model, as that was taking over in society, it's when we launched the war on poverty and had this really aggressive effort to say, look, we can address the problem of poverty in this country by creating enough programs to give people the things they need to raise up their material living standards. And so at this point, we have a safety net that we spend more than $1 trillion on every year.
Hmm.
And again, by its own definition, it has succeeded. In material terms, we've done an incredible job meeting people's basic needs and reducing what gets called the consumption poverty line. But as is implied in that, meeting the consumption poverty line doesn't actually lift people out of poverty. It just assures that they're going to need the same thing again next year. And in fact, when you do this approach, you have a huge problem, which is that you create a system that says, here's everything you get if you're not working.
Mhm.
And as you start working, we actually start taking these things away. So economically, you actually discourage work in a lot of cases. And culturally, you take away this idea that work is sort of the fundamental path to supporting your family, because not work starts to kind of look a lot like work in that
Well,
respect.
and Section 8 housing policy, where if you get subsidized housing, and then if you start making money, you lose your housing, and that's not really an
Yeah,
incentive.
that's right. And some of these programs, Section 8 is a perfect example where it's kind of binary, right? Either you
Sure.
have the housing or you don't.
Yeah.
The entire disability program has a similar problem where almost by definition, the premise is to get the money, you have to show that you can't work. And so actually going and trying to work can disqualify you.
Yeah.
But in even other, even when you talk about food stamps, the more money you earn, the less food stamps you're eligible for, and so on. Um, and so the alternative to this that I don't think should replace all or even most of the safety net, but should be part of the discussion, is what I call a wage subsidy, which is the idea that just like we take money out of every
So this
paycheck.
this is the big idea in the book. This is all roads lead to this, or is this one of many ideas? Knowing you probably have got 30 or 40 other ones, but let's talk
I,
about this one.
yeah, I'd say it's one of many. It's certainly
Yeah.
one that people are interested in talking about. It's certainly the most expensive one, which in a sense makes it the biggest, but in another sense makes it the hardest. I mean, a lot of the other things we've talked about, the nice things is it's not a budget issue at all. It's a structural issue. But certainly in budget and spending terms, this is the big one. So just like we take money out of paychecks for payroll taxes from your first dollar of earnings, we could put money into low wage paychecks, and right under your tax withholding line, you could have a work credit line
Hmm.
that puts money into your paycheck. So your $8 an hour job suddenly becomes an $11 an hour job. And if you did that, you get three really powerful effects. The obvious one, but the one that I think is actually least important, is you get more money to low income households.
Mhm.
And on balance, that's a good thing. But as we've been talking about, we have lots of ways to get resources to low income households, and that's not sufficient. It also has really powerful labor market effects on the supply side. When you think about it from the perspective of workers, it makes jobs much more attractive to take. You're going to make work much more attractive relative to non-work. And it's going to be right there in what looks like the wage you're being offered. So you're going to get people back into the workforce, get people stepping onto that first rung,
Mhm.
get young people seeing this as something to start doing. But then the other side of it is going to have an effect on employers. That, this is something that some people criticize the wage subsidy for, but I think it's a benefit. Probably less than half, but a portion of the benefit goes to the employer too. When you subsidize something, you encourage both sides of the transaction. And so you're going to make it more attractive for employers to create these kinds of jobs. You're going instead of today where, if you are a low wage employer, we attack you and ask, and shame you and treat you as if you're doing something wrong.
Yeah.
Again, both socially and economically, this policy says, no, you're doing something really socially valuable, investing in this kind of business, focusing on these
Well,
kinds of
as,
workers.
as a business owner, many times over, I would love to have something that would subsidize hiring somebody that I couldn't otherwise hire, uh, because there's a certain level of satisfaction. When we talk about non-economic, there's a lot of satisfaction in bringing people into your business and helping them get good at what they do. Maybe promoted, maybe if you even lose them because they go to somebody else because they've gotten so good, that's okay, because that's part of the satisfactions of running a business.
No, that's right. And I think most business owners feel that way
Yeah.
and will express that sentiment as you did. The reality is, though, is that it's hard and it's risky. And so, if it's something that has a lot of social value, we shouldn't shy away from the idea that we celebrate and want to encourage the employer behavior too. And so when you think about how do you make the labor market work better, how do you create more opportunities for workers, especially at the low end, if you want more of something, you can subsidize it. And so taking, if what I'm describing costs maybe $250 billion a year. So taking about a quarter of our safety net, and instead of saying 100, almost 100% of our safety net is going to be either ignoring work or discouraging work, let's keep 3/4 of it there. There are a lot of folks who really need that support, but gosh, let's at least have a quarter of it focused on this model that's actually encourages work and is attached to work. I think would be an incredible step.
Has this been tried anywhere? For example, there was a
So
universal basic income experiment in a couple of countries. It didn't work, but never. But has this been tried?
yeah, so the wage subsidy delivered through a paycheck hasn't been used
Mhm.
broadly. We have in this country a system called the Earned Income Tax Credit,
Sure.
which is supposed to be conceptually similar. The problem is it only goes to certain groups of people, and it comes in a
Yeah.
comes in a $5,000 chunk at the end of the year. It's not the right way to do it.